Hello, everyone, and welcome to another episode of Speak, Film, and Enter, a podcast where we review and rank movies. I'm Nate.
And I'm Adam.
Today, we are reviewing the new New York Times drama, She Said, about the New York Times report that broke open the Harvey Weinstein story and started the whole Me Too movement. Definitely one of the most impactful pieces of journalism probably in the last decade, I would say. Pretty safe to say, I think. Adam, would you like to tell the people what She Said is about?
Indeed. She Said, New York Times reporters Twohey and Jodi Kantor break one of the most important stories in a generation, a story that helped ignite a movement and shatter decades of silence around the subject of sexual assault in Hollywood.
All right. So very similar to what I just kind of said anyway. So,
yeah.
And this is the Harvey Weinstein. This is a movie about the reporters who uncovered the Harvey Weinstein story. Twohey and Jodi Kantor are played by Carey Mulligan and Zoe Kazan.
Mm-hmm.
And just very small thing. I definitely felt like I didn't realize that Zoe Kazan is like 41.
Right? She doesn't look it.
Yeah.
But I think that's because, and I don't mean this to sound bad, but I think it's just because she's so slight. She's such a, she's very thin. She's very small. Like she looks a little bit more like thin.
Well, kind of like myself. She's got a young face.
Yeah, that too. That helps
as well. It was just, as I was watching the movie, I realized I was like, she's somewhere between 25 and 40. And I'm not really sure.
Not 100% sure
what side she's closer to. It doesn't have anything to do with anything, but it was just something that went through my head early on in the movie. So this is a movie that is, about the writers, the journalists, and kind of how they discovered this story. But it's about many more things than that, or at least attempts to be. It's, the two main characters are Twohey and Jodi Kantor, but then we also focus a lot on the survivors and the victims who were willing to share their story, some who weren't, and ones who were willing to go on the record and kind of put their name behind it and put their careers on the line. And then it also is about just mothers and their children and women in the workplace in general. And it's about a lot of things. It's so more than just, if you're expecting something like Spotlight or All the President's Men, it's very much like those in some ways, but it definitely tries to be about more than just kind of the hunt for the story and getting that big detail that kind of pushes you over the top and turns it into something publishable and something that's going to be very impactful. It kind of tries to look at the whole scope of how this impacted mostly women and started the whole Me Too movement. I think that's a big part of the reason why this movie decides to focus not just on the reporting, but on kind of everything going on around it, is because it sparked the Me Too movement. And so it's trying to build up or kind of lay these foundations of just what these women are going through and what women in other offices are going through, like just at the New York Times in general. I mean, the two writers, the two journalists are women pursuing this story, and they're both mothers. Carey Mulligan's character, Twohey, is like, has a baby in the first half of the movie and is going through postpartum depression.
Yeah.
And that's just something that she goes through, and not a lot of attention is drawn to it. But I like a lot of the things that they decided to add and lend some focus to. I just don't know if they all worked together really well to make a cohesive movie.
Yeah, I would say I feel like they work together well to make a cohesive movie, but I would also say I don't think, because there's so many of those things going on, that the emotional impacts of them are all kind of shared instead of being like a 1 and then a 1 and then a 1. Like, you have your beats, but like they don't feel like it. The whole movie shares those things instead of like it feeling like they each has their own definitive emotional like punch.
Which I think is one exception to that. I think is a couple of the performances in the scenes for women sharing their stories were, for me, the most powerful moments of the movie. And one of them, I want to say Jennifer Ely, hers, and then is it Samantha Morton? I think she's the
trying to
other
find
one.
it.
I think it's those two.
Yeah, I
Yeah.
think so too.
And when they share their stories, the monologues, particularly Samantha Morton's, incredibly powerful. And the movie tries to do this balancing act of focusing on the lives of the journalists, but then also reminding us that, like, kind of saying, like, the real heroes here are the women who came forward and shared their stories, and collectively, by sharing stories together, we're able to finally get this published. And it makes for a lot of really good individual scenes, but then kind of back to your point where they don't necessarily all hit their big emotional beats. There's kind of a moment later on when Zoe Kazan's character has a big emotional moment when there's kind of seemingly a breakthrough, but it didn't, like, that moment didn't land for me for two reasons, I think. One, because we were focusing on so many different things, and that's more, the individual scenes weren't the problem. I just think it's a little overstuffed.
Yeah.
But the one actual, like, sort of big issue I had with this was, have you seen Spotlight or All the President's Men?
I've seen Spotlight. I haven't
Okay.
seen.
So, like, Spotlight does an
President's Men.
amazing job of making it clear to the audience exactly what the reporters need to get in order to make this story hit and be bulletproof from, like, potential lawsuits.
Yeah.
Right. I think She Said really struggles in this area because it's mentioned before, and this is just known, that there were people trying to publish this story for years about Harvey Weinstein. It was kind of an open secret.
Mm-hmm.
And then while they're doing their investigating, I think it's the New York Post in this movie. They say the Post is maybe looking at publishing something on this. And I think She Said comes up short in explaining to the audience, like, just what it is that they need, because we talk to a lot of women who won't go on the record or can't go on the record because of NDAs, and they kind of explain how that works in effective ways. But then there's never really that moment where it feels like where Spotlight has, where there's kind of a moment where Liv Schreiber's character sits down with everybody and says, like, show me this and this and this and get this information so we can prove this, so that we're good here and here and here. Yeah. And the audience understands exactly what they're going for. And that's where I think that moment with Zoe Kazan's character falls short for me, is because it's kind of a moment where, like, they're going to publish it already anyway.
Yeah.
But then they add a little bit more to make it stronger, and you can understand that as
they're already going to print with it, so it's like,
but they're already going to, and there's a little bit of a disconnect, and they don't do a great job of explaining what makes what they did different. Why were they able to publish this story and make it stick, and nobody else was before?
Yeah,
and I think that part was confusing to me, and I think it comes up short there. The other areas where I kind of had issues were more just trying to do too much in such a limited amount of time.
Yeah, I would agree. I think, especially when they bring up, like, the New York Post stuff, like, I know this story from, like, Ronan Farrow. Like, I know his name attached to this story because he was, I mean, the sources that I get my news from or whatever, like, that's who they mention. I've never heard of, Jennifer Twohey and Jodi Kantor, unfortunately, especially because, like, they're women and they wrote this story about women, and that's what it should be. I know Ronan Farrow's name attached to the Harvey Weinstein, and that's what, like, helped make him, a very popular journalist. So when they mentioned that, I was like, oh, well, I know that. Like, how come we didn't? I'm not saying they needed to work together, but, like, if somebody else is doing the same thing, you don't necessarily want to share your information. But, like, what made his different than this one? Why was this more impactful? I just didn't get that from this movie. But again, it's trying to balance a couple different things.
Yeah. I should say too, I mean, there's very good stuff in this movie as well. I feel like I just felt like,
yeah, I'm not trying to bring this movie down at all.
Right. There was potential for greatness here. And I think I wanted to get out of the way kind of the things that I felt like held it back.
Mm-hmm.
And really, with most of the things that held it back, I feel like this would have made an amazing, like, 6-hour miniseries.
Yeah.
Because they decided to focus on different things, which should be focused on. But with, like, a 2-hour and 15-ish minute movie, it becomes really hard to give everything the breathing room that it deserves.
Mm-hmm.
I think the performances are mostly really good. I think it's shot well. I think they shot this, like, actually in the New York Times building.
Oh, that's cool.
Which is kind of cool. It's got like a really great ensemble cast. Like we already mentioned, Zoe Kazan, Carey Mulligan, Jennifer Ely, Samantha Morton, but Patricia Clarkson and Andre Braugher are both in the Times and members of the kind of, they're reporting into them.
Mm-hmm.
And they both do a good job. I mean, a couple amazing moments. Andre Braugher just hanging up on Harvey Weinstein on the phone a couple times. Was really solid. Oh, I love that.
Yeah. I thought the performances were really good. I don't know that anybody necessarily super stood out to me. I mean, maybe Mulligan, because it feels like she had more command. She may have been more
she definitely had more of a presence than Zoe Kazan did in their scenes.
Yeah. She just commands more respect. I don't know, respect's the wrong word, but like that goes off of the scene that they're in where they show up at somebody's house and she's like, hey, why don't you take this one, to Zoe Kazan? And she's like, what, why? She's like, well, you're less intimidating than I am. And she's like, what? And they make a joke out of it, but I won't spoil that. But I think she's maybe a little bit more veteran. She's a more veteran writer in that room. So like she's kind of looked up to, and she's got more to handle, which is why her stress from her postpartum depression and her baby and her home life is a little bit more focused on. But I
should say I also really like the way that they make this clear that like this is a 24/7 job.
Yeah.
Like they're answering the phone from sources that they're trying to get in contact with at like in the middle of the night when they're asleep. They're answering the phone like in the morning when they're making lunches for their kid. They're answering the phone like when they're walking their kids in the park or having like family time or whatever, like out at dinner with their husband. Like there aren't moments here for them to just like leave it at work and just go home. And the movie does a really good job of showing that, again, like a focus on just like motherhood and having kids and a family, and like they find time to get it all done. And it seems like they don't have a minute to breathe, but they do get it done. And that's an interesting thing to focus on again. And all the scenes where they do that are well done. And I like that it's in there. I just think this could have been like 6 hours long and given everything like a lot of room.
A lot of room. Yeah. I think that what your point there is really indicative of, I mean, this movie starts out saying like this specific instance or specific topic is all based around mistreatment in the workplace of women. It's not like, oh, somebody was assaulted and like that's a story. It's straight up mistreatment of women in the workplace and how hard they've had to work to get respect, to get the jobs that they have, to be recognized as intellectuals or contributors, or more than just you're here to, give me something, if you know what I mean.
Yeah.
Like in that regard. So like I think that what you just talk about, like every aspect of their life is they're answering this, they're doing this, they're flying all over. Like that comes through so much. And I think that's a very good theme in this movie. Is like it's always a fucking 24/7 fight.
Yeah. I mean, this movie definitely, the entire time, its heart is in the right place. Even if it has a little misstep, it's for the right reasons because they're trying to do something interesting that they should be trying to do. And I like the movie because of that. And it is an interesting story. And there is a lot of just kind of All the President's Men spotlight style, just like interviews and like tracking down leads and trying to get people to talk and running into brick walls where people just like can't or won't speak to them. And that stuff is all done really well too. I just, it's just a little messy and a little overstuffed. And that for me prevents it from being great, but I still overall enjoyed the movie.
Yeah, I would agree with that. I think too, sometimes this can hurt that the Harvey Weinstein stuff, obviously it's been known about for a long time inside of Hollywood. And we got told about it, but because of these two women, Megan Twohey and Jodi Kantor, among others, obviously the whole team. So that's been brought to light, but that was brought to light a little while ago. And I sometimes feel like with a stories like this, maybe we're still too close to it. Like we're still too familiar. It's also like, it's about sex. It's about Hollywood. So people are very interested in stuff like that. So people have probably like read the whole article or gone into depth and looking at Harvey's, catalog of abuse, and the enablers that were around him. Like everybody knows a lot about the story because of the subject matter, where sometimes I feel like if you give it a couple more years, and maybe this is, what I could just be talking on my ass, maybe that's a reason. But if you give it just a little bit more time and maybe like fades from like cultural memory and then you bring it back up, people go, oh yeah, that was super fucked up. And obviously this is super fucked up, but it feels like people are very familiar with it. So like we already kind of know where it's going.
Right.
So it ends up being like a touch formulaic in that way.
I get what you're saying there. Well, there's also an element of like Ashley Judd plays herself.
Yeah. Which I thought that was surprising.
Fascinating. And then I couldn't tell if they actually got Gwyneth Paltrow on the phone. It's a very similar voice.
It's her real voice. I was looking at the cast list and she's credited as her own voice.
And that's kind of your point where like we're still really close to it. And I do wonder if maybe just waiting like 5 more years might have made, I don't know. But either way,
I also don't want to say that because like you should absolutely speak your truth. And when something of this nature happens, to go fucking talk about it and get it out there as fast as possible.
For sure.
But you know, because everybody knows the court case that happened and like he's in jail and all this other stuff. Like,
well, it takes away a little bit of an element of like mystery to a movie about investigative reporting, where there's an element of like, ooh, what information are they going to get?
Yeah, like
and that part's a little harder to find tension in when this is so recent and most people just know the story anyway.
Yeah, I would agree with that. I will save anything else I have to say for stars. Are you ready to get there?
Yeah, let's get into it.
All right, perfect. We'll be right back with our star ratings. Well,
once again, we fought over we fought over our little displays for the YouTube audience, but you know what? That's okay.
That's okay.
I can go first.
Sure.
I'm going to give this movie 3 stars. I think, you know, we've mentioned before where 3 stars they kind of come in 2 categories for me, where stuff is just like perfectly solid all the way through and never really gets above or below it. And then other movies where there are parts that are great, but it's kind of inconsistent. And that's kind of where this falls for me, where there's a lot of really good stuff here. I don't know if it all connects together enough to make a great movie.
Yeah.
But its heart is always in the right place, and it's telling a really important story, and it does it with a lot of heart. And it clearly a lot of care was put into this as well. And you can see that come through in the performances and just the sets and everything else about it. So 3 stars. It's a good movie. Not quite as good as I was hoping, but if you're interested in this movie and in this subject, then I definitely think you should check it out.
Yeah, I'd agree. I'm going to echo that. I'm at 3 stars as well. This is something that I feel like the parts that are done well are the emotional impact of the individual women and the stories that were told.
Yes.
And put it like, not necessarily the putting it all together and making the case like really stick and like, oh, well, we finally got him. And like, you know what I mean? Like that wasn't necessarily the focus for me, or that's not what hit me the hardest. It was the focus on character, which I think it absolutely should be, you know, with Ashley Judd sharing story, all the other women that we get. I wanted it to be slightly more compelling, but I didn't realize, you know, fully what this was going to try to tackle. So I think that's where I was a little bit like, oh, okay. But I know, like, I really liked it. I'm going to tell people to watch it. Obviously, it's Hollywood making a movie about somebody who was in Hollywood for a very long time, and I'm sure this was a difficult movie to make, let alone get people to recant their stories again, because they did it in court, they did it for the paper or the article, they're doing it again now for the movie, and like that's a lot of trauma to get through. That's a lot of care was taken for the book. Like a lot of care was taken to do this right, and I think they did it right. So
all right. So there's our review for She Said, playing in theaters right now. 3 stars from myself and from Adam. So again, I think that's right in that range where if you're already interested, definitely good enough to go check out. And if it doesn't seem like it's for you, I don't think it rises quite to that level where it's going to pull in people who are already kind of on the fence. So
yeah. All right.
It is my turn to put a wrap on the show.
Take it away, Nate.
Sometimes it's easy to forget that we spend most of our time stumbling around in the dark. Suddenly, a light gets turned on, and there's a fair share of blame to go around.